Thank you, Thomas. I heard the cheers of welcome, or I think it was a groan of disappointment, but I'm very happy to be here, Thomas. It's been a real pleasure to sit here all morning. But I am delivering the message that the ambassador wanted very much for the people who are attending here today to hear. And I do apologize for her sort of last-minute decision that she isn't able to be here this afternoon. As we prepared these remarks, we asked ourselves what would be of most interest to you, an audience of investors. What are your top priorities as investors? And as we thought about it, we realized that the priorities of investors in Ukraine are in many ways the same as the priorities of the Ukrainian people. A large majority of Ukrainians consistently support three general priorities: a successful end to the conflict with Russia, a prosperous economy, and a government that provides rule of law that respects the rights of all people equally. In many ways, that's what investors are looking for as well: a country at peace with a growing economy and a legal system that operates predictably and fairly. These priorities have also been a bedrock of the United States' partnership with and investment in Ukraine. In fact, since 2014, the United States has invested almost $3 billion in security and other assistance to Ukraine. We will continue to provide steadfast support to Ukraine's security, economic, and political and legal reforms. On the security front, we stand by the brave men and women of Ukraine's armed forces and will continue to support them. Still, the United States believes there is no strictly military solution to Ukraine's conflict with Russia. A diplomatic solution is the best option, and the cornerstone of our diplomatic strategy is the Minsk agreements. Reaching a diplomatic solution will not be easy, but we'll continue to support the diplomatic process. Turning to economic prosperity, supporting economic reforms continues to be one of the United States' highest priority in Ukraine. While reforms may not move forward as quickly as we would all like, it's important to note the progress Ukraine has made in 2018 and the optimism many businesses hold for 2019. Last year, the Rada passed and the President signed laws to bring strong corporate governance to state-owned banks, to improve the privatization process, to liberalize foreign currency and capital controls, to reduce business harassment by law enforcement, and to adopt a fiscally sound 2019 budget. If you, as I, were here throughout this morning's sessions, you heard some of the authors of these reforms and many of the other commentators refer to all of these important reforms. We also saw solid progress on implementing reforms in areas such as healthcare and decentralization. The reform of the National Bank of Ukraine over the last 5 years is one of Ukraine's greatest achievements and one of particular importance to investors. The building of a strong, independent central bank has been one of the foundations of Ukraine's economic progress. And the recent international recognition of the NBU's transparency shows international investors that international investors have taken notice. Of course, this congratulation for the successes to date does not mean that Ukraine is done reforming. More needs to be done this year. And we will continue to welcome reforms in areas such as opening up upstream energy sector to additional investment, improving governance of state-owned enterprises, and making progress on privatization. It's also worth noting that the United States Export-Import Bank is once again doing business in Ukraine. And our Congress has doubled funding worldwide for the United States Overseas Private Investment Corporation, or OPIC, to support the kind of investment that promote the broad-based growth Ukraine needs. So the United States will continue to look for ways to support good business deals in Ukraine. Economic reforms must be matched, however, by the strengthening of an effective, fair rule of law, the third priority area I mentioned. Only Ukraine's creation of a strong, transparent, well-administered rule of law will allow it to attract the kind of investment needed to make Ukraine's economy really take off. Successful anti-corruption reforms are critical to achieving this goal. Only empowered, independent anti-corruption institutions can apply the law equally to all citizens, regardless of wealth or power. And that is why taking such steps as selecting independent, qualified judges for the new anti-corruption court is so important. Which brings us back in a way to Ukraine's national security. The economic and rule of law reforms are important to attracting investors like you and building a prosperous, strong Ukraine. And in ensuring the economic Ukraine's integration with the Euro-Atlantic area. But building a prosperous, strong, democratic Ukraine and such Euro-Atlantic integration is, in the long run, the best way for Ukraine to frustrate Russia's malign hegemonic intentions. Another way Ukraine can frustrate Russia's aspirations is to hold free and fair elections. Ukraine, as a dynamic, thriving democracy, presents a stark contrast to the Kremlin's authoritarian ways. You have had the opportunity today to hear from some of the presidential candidates, and you will, as campaign season is in full swing. And as you know, the embassy is often asked which candidate the United States supports in the upcoming election. I'm going to answer that for you today. We support the Ukrainian people. We have stood shoulder to shoulder with Ukraine through 5 years of revolution and war. The Ukrainian people's goals are our priorities. We'll continue to stand with Ukraine as it moves forward on the path it has chosen towards peace, stable and strong economic foundations, and security in principled and uncompromising Western values. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you very much. Now we'll switch to Anatoliy Grytsenko. As you have seen, Mr. Grytsenko is one of the top politicians in the country. He's among the top 4, top 5 candidates, depending on which poll you look at. He's been in Ukraine politics for a long time. After the Orange Revolution in 2004, he was Minister of Defense, and he's been also deputy of the Ukraine Parliament several times. His political party also rates quite highly in the opinion polls. I will start with the following question. You have seen these polls as well. So before we start talking about what would you do if you won the presidential elections, what would be your program, so to say, how do you plan to win the elections? It still seems to be kind of there's still 1.5 months left, but there's 3 top candidates, Zelensky, Tymoshenko, and Poroshenko, and you are a little bit behind them. What is your recipe to catch up and to make it into the second round?
Good afternoon. Thank you, Tomasz. Thank you for inviting me here. With all respect to our partners, I see many more Ukrainians, so I will switch to Ukrainian. Sorry for those who must take the phones.
The real sociology will be on the 31st of March. And not only for this elections, but also for the parliamentary elections, we are aiming at building a strong coalition and good government. The only way out, and I'm hearing from people from all regions, people don't want to hear the criticism of the government. People who want status quo, they can vote for the government if they want to. People want to hear that our team understands the key issues, key challenges, that our team is proposing convincing ways of resolution of these problems, and that we are showing professional people with good morale, high standings, who can address those challenges. And that's what I want to talk about. I've heard the speech of the president. I've heard his highlights. So there is a choice between status quo or a change. And well, there's a reminiscence of a song, Parola, 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 which, like, when it sounds all very good from if this is said by the representative status quo. So didn't they have enough of those 5 years to do what they wanted? We'll do it much faster. We will introduce a competitive, honest land market, and not the new oligarchy in the agricultural sector. Didn't they have enough of this 5 years to do that? They haven't, and we will do it. We will fight corruption. Wasn't 5 years enough for them? At least one of the big fish caught from the entourage of the president. But we think you can't fight the corruption if you spearhead corruption at the same time. I think it's clear, eh? And we will strip oligarchy from influence to economic and political process. Wasn't 5 years enough to do that? It's difficult to fight oligarchs and monopoly if you are oligarch yourself, right? That's clear to everyone, no? So those who want status quo, who want to hear new populism from the lips of the same actor, you can follow him. I will talk about my team and about my vision of how to resolve this. From talking from Ukrainian and foreign investors, I know that their biggest concern are four main reasons that are the barriers of investing money into Ukraine. Because if you invest and then you can't take the money out, that isn't business, it's robbery. So number one is total corruption, starting from the top. Second is unprotected property rights, bribed court, destabilized banking system, monopolies in the key sectors, and oligarchs who are blocking access to the markets. So these are the main reasons. So to answer these questions that are of concern, that don't allow a country to thrive, were not given to us over these 5 years. I'm absolutely objective about what the government have done. There are some successes. There are things they've tried and they did not succeed, but it's this populism, corruption, looting of economy, and I think it's time to give way to others, because in this condition and with this pace, Ukraine is not moving towards EU or NATO, no matter what we write there. We are moving towards Africa of 1960s, with all due respect to African countries. I think we have to reverse that trend, 108%, 180%. We could have established a Klondike already. There are such conditions that you can have a boom, external and internal. Unfortunately, we haven't seen any of this, and business together with the citizens are escaping the country in millions, and that's a very sad trend, because if that status quo continues for another 3 years, it wouldn't matter any longer who of the president here will be the prime minister or president. There will be no one to appoint it for. So time is ticking, and that's the most important. We don't have much time. And we understand that the concerns of the people who will go and vote on the 31st of March, starting from the miserable pensions, salaries, unprotected property rights, the feeling of lack of safety, law enforcement, misuse of power. Answering all of these questions goes back to economy, and economy again. If the country is manufacturing, if everyone pays taxes honestly, then you have something to divide, to spend, and to improve the country. So let's go through all of these four things again. Corruption is a pyramid that starts from the top manager. The first time we will not have a pyramid, we'll have a trapezoid. So I was brought up in a totally different environment, and only by starting from the presidential administration, the government, the Secret Service, the prosecutor's office, we will bring it down to the level that is at any normal state, about 10%. And that's an anomaly that people fight for, and not the, everyday business. It has to be done quickly if it starts from the top position of the country, and I guarantee that. Corruption is not just unfavorable conditions, shadow economy, or psychologically difficult climate for investments. For us, corruption, we counted this with the Ukrainian Business Council, it's about 40 billion hryvnia worth of stolen money annually from the state budget. At the customs office, at the revenue service, at public procurements, at state-owned enterprises, at tariffs and monopolies, at pharmaceutical sector, energy sector, 400 billion that could have been used to raise the level of living for people and establishing a solvent market, which would also, through the public instruments, to support innovations, startup and technology, something that would build that prospect for Ukraine. The country that just exports grain, iron ore, has no perspective, has no future. So we have to focus on industry and processing in the agricultural sector. Only then added value will be created here, the technologies will be here, and the education and the standards of education can be developed by the country, which is important for the business. The standards will be here, and people will not escape this country. But from 5 to 7 years, we'll want to go back to a stable country where the rights and ownership has to be protected. And these things will be made sure. The Anti-Monopoly Committee, the name of which no one really knows now, will become a more powerful structure than General Prosecutor's Office, and probably the name of the person will know better than some of the key ministers, and that's the only way of destroying the monopoly, creating the equal playing field country. I represent the country that supports liberal democratic principles in economy and policy. Hromadянska Opozycja Party is the membership of the liberal democratic parties of Europe. So things like equal opportunities, the people, freedom and competition versus monopoly are the basic things that we stand on and will continue to stand, not just in words like the current government, but in specific steps. I'm running this election only for one tenure. I already said that, not to have any suspicion or things like the current government and trying to stick to this chair using the bribes and provocation. We have to graduate these election campaigns stronger than we are now. So if external investors believe in Ukraine, we will do our best to make sure it happens. The scale of our country in terms of the territory is the largest country in Europe. Well, Russia is Eurasian, it's not really European, but in terms of the numbers of people, including those who left, these are the key countries of the European Union. Increasing the competition and making the focus on investments rather than borrowings. So the opportunity to earn money without bribes, without kickbacks, any step is a priority. I'm sure that the business will believe this and will come, because the outcomes will be not in 5 years. The 4 reasons that are holding back the development were already made, but this is our feeling, and this is the answers that you give during surveys, because there is corruption. Why didn't you come here? Because the corruption, unstable hryvnia, no rule of law. I see two people in the half of our people are so happy about the banking reform for the last couple of years. I'm not happy about it.
I'm not happy because 55% of the banking sector are state banks. Is that the successful reform? And this domination of the state in the banking sector, does anyone believe this is a success? Our position is totally different, reducing the role of the state in all sectors, including banking sector, reducing the share of the national budget distributed through the national budget of the state revenues. The state should not be a monster controlling everything. This is like going back to the Soviet times, and we're not going to have that. The banking system that can only give loans to people at 35% and give loans to business at 20-25. Is that success? You can only trade in arms, drugs, and engage in corruption. This is not the business climate. Similarly, you cannot consider the tax system reforms a success. Foreign partners during their lunchtime can talk to our domestic entrepreneurs, and they will tell them that our entrepreneurs are paying two types of taxes, official and unofficial, or official and corrupt. So when there's only one tax, then economy will grow, and this is what we're gonna make it happen. And I will make them understand with your help that business is not philanthropy. It's the people are looking like fish are looking for deeper places. And we hope that corruption will not pass. I do not have my own business. I do not want to have offshores and blind trusts like the current president. I don't have over 50 enterprises that he should have closed down. And this is going to be a totally different morality, and we're going to pick the people of the same morality. Lastly, I believe that every candidate has to go on elections in a transparent and honest manner. So there are 5 key positions where the president is given the key role in the decision-making. Prosecutor General, Chief of Security Service, Chief of the National Bank, and 2 ministers, Defense and Foreign Affairs. And I believe that every candidate, and we have 44 of them, by themselves are both the clinic and the disease. Nevertheless, every candidate has to show their top 5 team members now before the vote. I have started this process, and I have already shown the chief of SBU, who will definitely cut off that economic component and will focus the SBU on maintaining its key functions. I've shown the Minister of Defense, who will definitely not let anyone, neither the current president nor me nor anyone else, to earn money on the blood, on the things that are procured for the army. I have started by showing the National Bank chief, potential national, is Alexander Savchenko here. This person will ensure the normal stability of the banking system, will clean up the National Bank from corruptioners and the banks, and they will maintain the thresholds of the key parameters to make sure we don't have the vacuum cleaner banks that are pulling the money out of this. We have a national sport where they take loans, they go into corrupt courts, they're paying 10% to the court, and they are saying, okay, we're not giving back the loans. We want to clean up all of these fields. We do not want to promise. We will definitely make it happen because we keep our words. Thank you very much. Thank you very much. You have listed all key areas of concern for the incoming direct foreign investments, including the block of the rule of law that is impedes the arrival of more foreign direct investments. As to the key positions, regarding the National Bank, the investors preferred that the National Bank is independent, that no one of the board of the National Bank could be changed with the arrival of the new president or chief of government, and the members of the board are appointed for 7 years. And there's a limited list of reasons of why a person can be changed from the board of governors of the National Bank. The nearest term expires in 1991 of a board member. So I believe, yes, you may influence SBU and foreign policy and defense, but as far as the National Bank is concerned, we would prefer it that, this direction could stay intact. It's working well, and it can handle itself by itself. Well, I have to react to that. If we can see a problem, then we have two ways out of it. If you want to solve it, we'll find ways to solve it. If we don't want to solve it or we're too afraid to solve it, then we calculate reasons why it's hard to do. This matter touches upon not only the National Bank. This matter also is related to the newly established the anti-corruption bodies, the anti-corruption agency, the anti-corruption court that is being under the investigation bureau, etc. If the new president wants to have freedoms in place and property rights supported, they will find a way to make it happen, including the Board of Governors of the National Bank. Does the National Bank know that there are the vacuum cleaner banks? They do. Ms. Rashkova, does she know about that? Everybody knows that name. Who made it happen? Who did not control the captive parameters, and then after that, the state just had to nationalize the bank, and it was all done by all real people. Are those people in the board of the government who allowed refinancing that did not support the sustainability of specific banks, but it was simply stolen overnight to collapse the hryvnia further? Do they know? I will not tolerate such people there. These are no games. If the president is a guarantor, he has to guarantee and use all interests to guarantee that. Not for me, but in order to protect the entrepreneurs. If the president has more or less limited rights to influence different authorities, different agencies, if I can see that your property is being stolen, some people came in camouflage and you have planted the harvest and somebody comes to collect it, or you've built it and somebody else comes in and says it's mine, I will not tolerate that. And they need good stuff to do that. But we all want to make sure that the system will not depend on the people, that it will not depend on the name of the president, of the chief of the governor of the National Bank. President Poroshenko was a board member of the National Bank for many years. Did he stop all those transactions? No. Those people are not going to be there, this kind of people. I have the last question regarding economy. For investors, both domestic and external, the good indicator of whether or not the country is moving in the right direction is cooperation with the IMF. I believe that most probably cooperation with our international financial partners, well, you will support that. On the other hand, you're saying that it shouldn't be a goal in itself, that Ukraine has to be independent of such support through bringing in more foreign direct investments. Can you elaborate on that? Thank you. I'll explain. First, I don't know if the people who are working in the IMF are still here, whether they have left. I would like to thank the IMF for the support they've given us starting from 2014 at this difficult, turmoilous stage. In the past, we also had some experience of positive cooperation, and they're still giving us support in the conditions when the country is under the threat of the military aggression of occupied territories. It's difficult, and when their external changes have not yet reached the critical point where we could do this independently, and I sincerely thank them for it. I clearly understand, and our calculations are supporting that the support of the IMF in the absolute figures, in addition to stimuli for investors, are incomparable with the resources available in the country. We have much more resources than what we're asking. The IMF is sort of a financial ambulance, a rapid financial response. And the countries who are sustainable and who are standing on their feet strongly, they do not seek IMF support. I think we can finish this program and we can engage domestic resources to not have to ask for further support from the IMF. We should put the stake on the local resources. I will relocalize the capitals. I will bring back the money from offshores without asking, without persecution, without asking where did the people get this money from. Lots of people were saving it up for the dark day. They're not taking this money into the banks, but they're keeping them under their pillows. This is not improving the interest rate, the exchange rate. They're not improving the economy, but we want to bring it into the economy without asking where the people got this money from. The legislation was such that lots of people were working in the black zone. They do not trust this. And we want to draw the line there, and we want to work transparently instead, giving resources to the entrepreneurs, and I think it would be a very important positive step. And also the president is responsible for defense. What would you do as commander-in-chief? What would you do differently? Would you continue the Minsk process? Or as one of the candidates is saying, return to the Budapest Memorandum, and as it actually depends on Ukraine? Does the solution of this conflict depend on Ukraine, or you can just defend yourselves and continue working in the diplomatic directions? Yeah, you've asked two questions. You started with defense and moved to diplomacy. According to the Constitution, the president is a key figure in both of those fields, as commander-in-chief and as a key person in foreign relations. That's true. Regarding defense, I'm an officer myself, 25 years in the army. I know this field professionally. It's easy for me. We will abolish forced conscription. We will have professional contract army. Secondly, the reserve of full readiness, similar to the system of National Guard of the United States, if you know, the National Guard of the U.S., where a person with military training remains in the civil sector, but spends 3 to 4 weeks per year in a specific military unit, and under the contract gets money for it, and in military conditions or in the conditions of threat, they can start rolling easily. And secondly, a well-developed system of territorial defense. Those of you who know how Finland or Sweden are building it, where people are in the civil sector, entrepreneurs, agrarians, librarians, journalists, but they've been through basic training, and in our conditions, over 300,000 people have been through the front. They don't want to serve every day, but they want to be able to protect their village, their business, and their family. And no Putin is gonna come. So unfold such system of territorial defense in the areas bordering on the military conflict and then throughout the country. As to the strengthening of defense, we will improve the lifts, the staff lifts for the possibilities for HR promotion, for personal promotion. We will improve the situation. We will remove the generals who have spent too much time in the headquarters or are maintaining the corruption schemes there. We will rebalance the enforcement structures, the power structures. If we take the enforcement sector, it's only a quarter in this state. The remainder are the forces of domestic security, of interior security, that are protecting the government from the people rather than the people from the external enemy. And that's the task for the president. Similarly to the fact that the power of the president, it is to bring the number of generals to the normal NATO standards, to make sure we don't have those huge stars, sometimes bigger than the actual soldier carrying them. As to diplomacy and Minsk process, there's a plan for the occupation of Donbass at the first stage, and I've been engaged in a non-public working group that has been working for a year, so-called Track 2. The 4 parties were engaged, and it's up on the table, but it's not involved yet. It's not yet rolling. Why is it not rolling yet? Because it's not the task for Ukraine, given the fact that it's very painful for us, and I hope we all can realize the scale. Europe is now crying bitter tears. There are scandals between the countries, barriers, negotiations, because 1.5 million refugees have come for 1 year, but we have 1.6 million. It's a size of a small European country, and you realize this is a huge problem. The seized territories are bigger than several NATO countries or EU countries taken together. And this is the third millennium. Ukraine has been and remains a peaceful state. It has never had any plans, any claims on other territories, other peoples, other nations' territories. And I'm stating this with full responsibility as a former member of the Parliamentary Committee of Security and Defense. We're a peaceful country in the third millennium that has lost huge territories, millions of people, and has 1.6 million refugees. Direct question, is this an international crime or not? Are we afraid to call this a crime? Are we not, or are we not? In 2008, Georgia has had 2 of its republics taken away. The EU, the NATO, has been afraid to call it a crime. They called it excessive use of force. But guys, if that is the case, we will be looking for solutions for a long time. Only these decisions can only be taken together. Either we are a civilized society and we do not tolerate and we do not pardon anyone, particularly the state that's one of the 5 signatories who took responsibility for security and inviolability of the international borders. Are we going to be hiding our eyes, or are we going to say that's true? And then if the sanctions are not giving us results after the Minsk process, and after the Minsk process more people died in Ukraine than before the Minsk process, that means a different solution has to be found. Without abolishing Minsk, without traumatizing the signatories, but we should look for a more effective solution. That means we have to strengthen the sanctions and not discuss their abolition. Make those sanctions personal for the closest circle of Putin. And then we can guarantee that this is not going to happen to Estonia or to any other country. And then Ukraine understands clearly that bilateral negotiations with Putin are not going to give us anything. This can only be capitulation, and we will not allow capitulation to happen. Ms. Merkel has been supporting these negotiations, but she was rushing out of the negotiation rooms angry-faced because she saw there was no way out there. It has to be done between Ukraine, Russia, and the international community. And Europe should decide what they should do. Should it be France, Germany, and other countries deciding this solely, or should it involve other countries like Lithuania who feel the possible risk, or will the UK be present there as a former signatory of the Budapest agreements? Most importantly, the agreement has to stipulate the conditions for Ukraine and conditions for the aggressor state. And all parties have to make sure that these agreements are implemented. We don't have time for another false start. It has to be a success of international diplomacy and, if you want, international sanction process. And I mentioned that in the introduction. The policy of our team will be completely predictable, clear for our citizens, and it will be forecastable for our international partners. No surprises, clear conversation. Here's the line of the Ukrainian national interests. Here is the line of other international organizations, international partners, the space for negotiations, for compromise. When we found this line, we sign it and we implement this. We will not have such terrible stories like we do now, such shameful stories that undermine the Minsk agreements. Just two examples. Dalia Grybauskaitė visited us in December, and she announced, she's the president of Lithuania, and she announced that after Russia captured 24 of our seamen who wanted to pass through the Kerch Straits, Lithuania has introduced sanctions against those who have captured our seamen. And Ukraine has not introduced those sanctions. How can that happen? This is impossible. Or we're talking in Davos to the representatives of the EU, and they're saying that they've introduced sanctions in solidarity with us against those who did fake elections in November in these captured territories, contrary to Minsk agreements. And Ukraine has introduced none. So this hybrid diplomacy is not going to happen in Ukraine under my rule. Ukraine will be unanimous, and we must not cheat on our partners.
Okay, well, thank you very much. That was very exhaustive presentation and definitely answered all my questions. I would love to give you an opportunity to ask questions as well, but we have the next scheduled meetings over lunch. I'm sure Mr. Grytsenko will be around in Ukraine politics, and we'll have more chances to talk to him. Whether he's, we wish him luck during the presidential and parliamentary elections.
We need the luck.
And after lunch, we have also a very interesting program with several companies. And at 6 p.m., I would like to point your attention to a political presentation where a new poll will be presented by Jeremy Rosner from GQR, an American pollster that has been following Ukraine politics for a long time. They have done the most recent poll in the first decade of February, so it will be interesting to hear from him those results in detail and in English. Thank you very much.
Thank you.